If you want to become an editor or understand the film that you watch regularly, layer by layer, then this book.
It would be in the blink of an eye.
Walter Murch is one of the most respected film editors of all time.
In the blink of an eye.
And his book, In the Blink of an Eye,
Is in the blink of an eye.
I know you are intelligent enough to listen to this audiobook to enrich your intelligence much more. Once digital projection makes significant inroads, however, film laboratories such as Technicolor will find it difficult to operate in the black, since most of their profits come from massive theatrical print orders, sometimes as high as 50,000 feet of film per motion picture. When, not if, the laboratories go out of the film business, motion picture companies will inevitably turn to digital cameras for original photography. In the summer of 2000, George Lucas dispensed with film entirely and shot the next Star Wars film with Sony high-definition digital cameras. In the almost immediate future, then, when final projection and original photography are digitized, the entire technical process of filmmaking will be digital from start to finish, and the whole technical infrastructure will telescope in upon itself with great suddenness. Some of the consequences of this we can foresee. Others are unpredictable, but this transformation will likely be complete in less than 10 years. Of course, there will be wonders to compensate us for the loss of our old friends, Clapstick, Sprocket, and Reel. Of course, the blurring of borders between video, computers, and film will vastly increase. Of course, digital creatures, and perhaps even actors, will be born that will make 1993's Jurassic Park seem like 1933's King Kong. Of course, Channel 648 will be a live transmission of the planet Earth as seen from the moon, in stunning detail, occupying the entire liquid crystal wall of your media room. But what will cinema, the habit of seeing motion pictures in a theatrical setting, what will cinema be like in 2099? Will the digital revolution, so intoxicatingly heady at the moment, transform cinema into something unrecognizable to us today, for better or worse? Will cinema perhaps have ossified by 2099 into the 21st century's version of grand opera? Tuxedo-clad crowds attending yet another projection of 160-year-old Casablanca, unimaginably enhanced by some technological grandson of today's digital wizardry. Or perhaps cinema will have disappeared completely, overrun by some technical social upheaval as unimaginable to us as the kinetoscope's ultimate transformation in 1899. The parallels between the immigrants cranking their kinetographs in the amusement arcade and your teenager locked in his room with Lara Croft from the Tomb Raider game are striking. Of course, as soon as we pose these questions, we know it's silly even to attempt an answer. But it is December 1999, after all, the end of a millennium. Why not? Is the complete digitization of the art and industry of cinema something that will be ultimately good for it? To even attempt an answer to a question like that, we need to find some analogous development in the past. The one that seems closest to me is the transformation in painting that took place in the 15th century, when the old technique of pigments on fresco was largely replaced by oil paint on canvas. Some of the greatest, if not the greatest, triumphs of European pictorial art were done in fresco, the painstaking process whereby damp plaster is stained with various pigments that as they dry bond chemically with the plaster and change color. One need only think of Michelangelo's frescoed ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the pictorial equivalent of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. A great deal of advanced planning needs to be done with fresco. Its variables, such as the consistency and drying time of the plaster, have to be controlled exactly. The artists who worked in fresco needed a precise knowledge of the pigments and how they would change color as they dried. Once a pigment had been applied, no revisions were possible. Only so much work could be done in a day before the plaster applied that morning became too dry. Inevitably, cracks would form at the joints between subsequent applications of plaster. The arrangement of each day's subject matter had to be chosen carefully to minimize the damage from this unpredictable cracking. It should be clear that fresco painting was an expensive effort of many people and various interlocking technologies overseen by the artist who took responsibility for the final product. The invention of oil paint changed all of this. The artist was freed to paint wherever and whenever he wanted. He did not have to create a work in its final location. His paint was the same color wet as it would eventually be when dry. He did not have to worry unduly about cracking surfaces, and the artist could paint over areas that he didn't like, even to the point of reusing canvases for completely different purposes. Although painting in oils remained collaborative for a while, the innate logic of the new medium encouraged the artist to take more and more control of every aspect of his work, intensifying his personal vision. This was tremendously liberating, and the history of art from 1450 to the present is a clear testimony to the creative power of that liberation and some of its dangers, which found ultimate expression in the late 19th and 20th centuries, with the emergence of solitary and tortured geniuses like Van Gogh. The nature of working with film has been more like painting in fresco than oil. It's so heterogeneous, with so many technologies woven together in a complex and expensive fabric, that filmmaking is almost by definition impossible for a single person to control. There are a few solitary filmmakers. Jordan Belson comes to mind, but these are exceptional individuals, and their films' subject matters are geared to allow creation by a single person. By contrast, digital techniques naturally tend to integrate with each other because of their mathematical commonality, and thus become easier to control by a single person. I can see this already happening in the sound mixing work that I do, where the borders between sound editing and mixing have begun to blur. And this blurring is about to happen in the further integration of film editing and visual effects. So let's suppose a technical apotheosis sometime in the middle of the 21st century, when it somehow becomes possible for a single person to make an entire feature film with virtual actors. Would this be a good thing? If the history of oil painting is any guide, the broadest answer would be yes, with the obvious caution to keep a wary eye on the destabilizing effect of following too intently a hermetically personal vision. One need only to look at the unraveling of painting or classical music in the 20th century to see the risks. Let's go even further and force the issue to its ultimate conclusion by supposing the diabolical invention of a black box that could directly convert a single person's thoughts into a viewable cinematic reality. You would attach a series of electrodes to various points on your skull and simply think the film into existence. And since we are time traveling already, let us present this hypothetical invention as a Faustian bargain to the future filmmakers of the 21st century. If this box were offered to you by some mysterious cloaked figure in exchange for your eternal soul, would you take it? The kind of filmmakers who would accept or even leap at the offer are driven by the desire to see their own vision on screen in as pure a form as possible. They accept present levels of collaboration as the necessary evil to achieve their visions. Alfred Hitchcock, I imagine, would be one of them, judging from his description of the creative process. The film is already made in my head before we start shooting. The kind of filmmakers who would instead reject the offer are interested foremost in the collaborative process of filmmaking and in seeing a detailed vision mysteriously emerge out, else that process, rather than being imposed by a single individual from the beginning. Francis Ford Coppola's colorful description of his role sums it up. The director is the ringmaster of a circus that is inventing itself. The paradox of cinema is that it is most effective when it seems to fuse two contradictory elements, the general and the personal, into a kind of mass intimacy. The work itself is unchanging, aimed at an audience of millions, and yet, when it works, a film seems to speak to each member of the audience in a powerfully personal way. The origins of this power are mysterious, but I believe they come from two of the primary characteristics of motion pictures: that it is a theater of thought and that it is a collaborative art. Film is a dramatic construction in which, for the first time in history, characters can be seen to think at even the subtlest level, and these thoughts can then be choreographed. Sometimes these thoughts are almost physically visible, moving across the faces of talented actors like clouds across the sky. This is made possible by two techniques that lie at the foundation of cinema itself: the close-up, which renders such subtlety visible, and the cut, the sudden switch from one image to another, which mimics the acrobatic nature of thought itself. And collaboration, which is not necessarily a compromise, may be the very thing if properly encouraged, that allows film to speak in the most developed way to the largest number of people. Every person who works on a film brings his or her own perspective to bear on the subject. And if these perspectives are properly orchestrated by the director, the result will be a multifaceted and yet integrated complexity that will have the greatest chance of catching and sustaining the interest of the audience, say, which is itself a multifaceted entity in search of integration. None of the foregoing, however, addresses the fact that cinema is, by definition, a theatrical, communal experience for the audience as well as the authors, but one in which the play remains the same each time it's shown. It is the audience's reactions that change. The mid-20th century pessimism about the future of cinema, which foresaw a future ruled by television, overlooked the perennial human urge, at least as old as language itself, to leave the home and assemble in the fire-lit dark with like-minded strangers to listen to stories. The cinematic experience is a recreation of this ancient practice of theatrical renewal and bonding in modern terms, except that the flames of the Stone Age campfire have been replaced by the shifting images that are telling the story itself. Images that dance the same way every time the film is projected, but which kindle different dreams in the mind of each beholder. It is a fusion of the permanency of literature with the spontaneity of theater. I would like to emphasize the words leaving of familiar surroundings. The theatrical cinematic experience is really born the moment someone says, "Let's go out." What is implicit in this phrase is a dissatisfaction with one's familiar surroundings and the corresponding need to open oneself up in an uncontrolled way to something other. And here we have the battle between motion pictures in the home and cinema. For I'll venture that the true cinematic experience can't be had in the home, no matter how technically advanced the equipment becomes. I am struck, for example, at how often someone tells me that they have seen a certain film in a theater and that they were impressed with the level of detail in picture and sound, something they never experienced when they saw the same film on video at home. Well, I have seen both the film and the video, and I have to say that by and large, the level of detail is comparable, if not exactly the same. What is definitely not the same, however, is the state of mind of the viewer. At home, you are king, and the television is your jester. If you're not amused, you take out the remote control and chop off his head. The framework of home viewing is familiarity. What is right is what fits with the routine, which implies a mindset that sees only what it wants or is prepared to see. Going out, however, involves some expense, inconvenience, and risk. Remember that you will be sitting in a dark room with as few as 6 or as many as 600 strangers, perhaps even more. No distractions, no way to stop the film once it starts, and it starts at a certain time whether or not you are there. This produces a mindset that is open to experience in a way that home viewing can never replicate. Most mysteriously important, however, are those 6 or 600 strangers sitting with you, whose muffled presence alters and magnifies the nature of what you see in an unquantifiable way. Let's say that the average age in the audience is 25 years. 600 times 25 equals 15,000 years of human experience assembled in that darkness, well over twice the length of recorded human history of hopes, dreams, disappointments, exultation, tragedy, all focused on the same series of images and sounds, all brought there by the urge, however inchoate, to open up and experience as intensely as possible something beyond their ordinary lives. The new century has recently turned. The digital revolution has not swept the field, yet anyway. And when it does, it will be many years before Mephistopheles arrives with his electrode-studded black box. There will be collaboration in motion pictures, grudging or not, for many years to come. But it seems that if we are looking out for the shadow that digital might cast, we might look in the direction of anything that encourages a solitary, monolithic vision and discourages developed complexity, both at the beginning, in the production of film, and at the end in its theatrical enjoyment. And since I'm here to draw conclusions, I'll come down on the affirmative side and say that cinema will be with us 100 years from now. Different, of course, but still cinema. Its persistence will be fueled by the unchanging human need for stories in the dark, and its evolution will be sparked by the technical revolutions now getting underway. We are perhaps now where painting was in 1499, so we have a few good centuries ahead of us, if we are careful. Beyond that, who knows? Let's meet again in 2099 and have another look around. Now let's get to know about this incredible writer of this book who is an excellent editor. Walter Murch has been honored by both British and American Motion Picture Academies for his picture editing and sound mixing. In 1997, Murch received an unprecedented double Oscar for both film editing and sound mixing on The English Patient, 1996, Dyer A. Minghella, as well as the British Academy Award for Best Editing. 17 years earlier, he received an Oscar for Best Sound for Apocalypse Now, 1979, Dyer F. Coppola, as well as British and American Academy nominations for his picture editing on the same film. He also won a double British Academy Award for his film editing and sound mixing on The Conversation, 1974, Dyer F. Coppola, was nominated by both Academies for Best Film Editing for Julia, 1977, Dyer F. Zinnemann, and in 1991 received 2 Oscar nominations for Best Film Editing for the films Ghost, Dyer J. Zucker, and The Godfather Part 3, Dyer F. Coppola. Among Murch's other picture editing credits are for The Unbearable Lightness of Being, 1988, Dyer P. Kaufman, House of Cards, 1993, Michael Lesack, Romeo is Bleeding, 1994, Dyer P. Medak, First Night, 1995, Dyer A. Zucker, and The Talented Mr. Ripley, 1999, Dyer A. Minghella. Murch was the re-recording mixer for The Rain People, 1969, Dyer F. Coppola, THX 1138, 1971, Dyer G. Lucas, The Godfather, 1972, Dyer F. Coppola, American Graffiti, 1973, Dyer G. Lucas, The Godfather Part 2, 1974, Dyer F. Coppola, and Crumb, 1994, Dyer T. Zwigoff, as well as all the recent films for which he has also been picture editor. He has also been involved in film restoration, notably Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, 1998, and Francis Coppola's Apocalypse Now Redux, 2001. Screenplays on which Murch has collaborated include THX 1138, directed by George Lucas, and The Black Stallion, 1979, uncredited, directed by Carol Ballard. Murch directed and co-wrote the film Return to Oz, released by Disney in 1985.